What if I told you that there is a single piece of paper, like a very specific professional license that can just instantly boost your earning potential by 25 to 35%, like overnight?
I mean, that sounds almost like a scam, but it's completely real.
Right. But the catch is, to get it, you have to survive an assessment process that is just so rigorous. I mean, we're talking AI-generated physics exams, 110-question ethical gauntlet, and this highly proctored multi-page defense of basically your entire professional life.
Yeah, it is. It's the ultimate test of both your technical endurance and, frankly, your bureaucratic navigation skills. We are talking about a license where the rules of the game have just been, well, entirely rewritten.
Exactly. So today we are diving deep into the professional engineer license in Canada, the P.Eng.
Right.
And this isn't just some vanity title you slap on your LinkedIn profile to look good. This is essentially a global passport for engineers.
Oh, absolutely. It grants you the legal authority to sign and stamp documents. You're taking absolute legal liability for a project. And, it commands the immense market value that comes with that authority.
Yeah. But today, we are zeroing in on Ontario specifically.
Right.
And their regulatory body, which is known as PEO, so Professional Engineers Ontario.
And the reason we are focusing on Ontario instead of the whole country is because of a massive, just unprecedented shift in their framework that went into effect super recently, July 1st, 2026.
Right.
The source material we're working from today is this incredibly detailed seminar transcript from right after these changes dropped. So it's basically a masterclass in this new system.
It really is. It breaks down the exact mechanics of how to get licensed under these new rules that are honestly much faster, but in a lot of ways way more demanding than before.
Yeah, they really are.
We are going to unpack every strategic nugget, every weird edge case, and, all the psychological hurdles of this process. But before we get into the weeds of handwritten exams and competency matrices, I want you, the listener, to think about your own career for a second.
Yeah, put yourself in this headspace.
Exactly. Have you ever held off on pursuing a massive career milestone, like a certification, a degree, a promotion, simply because the bureaucratic red tape just seemed too overwhelming to even start?
It is honestly the most common barrier to entry in any regulated profession. People look at this labyrinth of requirements and they just decide, well, the status quo is easier. I'll just stay where I am.
Yeah, exactly. But what if that labyrinth suddenly became a straight line? So let's look at the foundational rules. To even step foot in the PEO arena in Ontario, what is the universal baseline? I know Canada has different provincial bodies, like Quebec does its own thing. But generally, where do we start?
So the baseline is essentially twofold. First off, you need to be of, quote, good character.
Good character. That sounds a bit Victorian, doesn't it?
Right. It sounds like you need a letter from a priest. But in administrative terms, this usually boils down to just not having a criminal background.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. You are entering a self-regulated profession where public safety is literally in your hands. If you are, say, designing the water treatment plant for a major city, or the structural supports for a skyscraper,
the regulatory body needs to know you aren't going to, cut corners for a bribe.
Exactly. So good character is step one. They need to trust you.
Okay, so assuming you aren't an international jewel thief or a convicted fraudster, you check that box. What's the academic baseline?
The academic foundation is pretty straightforward. It's a 4-year engineering degree. This must be a bachelor's degree from a university or a college. And importantly, it can be from anywhere in the world.
Anywhere at all.
Yep. It absolutely does not have to be a Canadian institution.
Okay, so a clean record and a 4-year degree. That sounds entirely reasonable. But here is where the July 2026 revolution really kicks into high gear, right? And where Ontario just completely separated itself from the rest of the country. Let's talk about the work experience requirement.
This is the tectonic shift. This changes everything. So historically across Canada, and this is still the case in almost every other province today, an applicant must prove they have 4 full years of engineering work experience before they can even be considered for a P.Eng license.
Right. 4 years was the ironclad standard forever.
Exactly. But as of July 1st, 2026, PEO slashed that requirement directly in half. They dropped it from 4 years to just 2 years.
See, I have to pause here and push back on this because my immediate reaction, and I imagine the reaction of anyone driving over an overpass in Toronto now, is panic.
Oh, totally. People hear that and freak out.
Right, because if the regulatory body is dropping the experience requirement by 50%, Aren't they just lowering the standard? Like, are we suddenly going to have critical infrastructure designed by people with half the practical experience?
That is the exact fear most people voice when they first hear this. It sounds reckless. But we really need to look at the mechanics of how they are evaluating those 2 years. They are absolutely not lowering the standard. They are entirely shifting the burden of proof.
Shifting the burden. What do you mean by that?
So under the old 4-year system, there was a heavy reliance on basically just time and seat. If you occupied a desk at an engineering firm for 48 months, that sheer quantity of time was heavily weighted. You were just there.
Just kind of absorbing it by osmosis.
Right. What PEO has done is pivot away from chronological quantity and toward highly scrutinized quality. They are demanding that the 2 years you do submit are incredibly dense with actual provable engineering application.
Okay, so how do they prove that?
It is tested through a really rigorous competency-based assessment, which we will break down later. But basically, it's not that they want less experience. They want a much higher density of verifiable skill.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like the difference between someone who spends 4 years fetching coffee and running basic spreadsheets at a firm versus someone who spends 2 years leading really complex multidisciplinary design projects.
Exactly. The 2-year person is vastly more qualified, even though they have less time on the clock.
Got it.
And this ties directly into another massive barrier that PEO eliminated recently, which perfectly sets the stage for this new system. They entirely scrapped the Canadian experience requirement.
This is huge. I want to spend a minute on this because the Canadian experience requirement was infamous. For decades, it was literally the ultimate catch-22 for immigrants.
Oh, it was a bureaucratic nightmare. The old rule mandated that out of your required years of experience, at least 1 or 2 years had to be strictly Canadian work experience, supervised by a Canadian PA.
Right. So you have this incredibly brilliant structural engineer who moves to Ontario. Say they have 10 years of experience building earthquake-resistant high-rises in Tokyo or massive infrastructure projects in Mumbai.
Incredible experience.
Right, world class. They arrive in Canada and they are told, sorry, none of that fully counts until you get Canadian experience. So they go to apply for an engineering job, and the employer says, sorry, we can't hire you for this senior role because you don't have your P.Eng.
Yep. You couldn't get the license without the job, and you couldn't get the job without the license. It artificially suppressed the careers of thousands of highly skilled professionals. You had senior engineers driving Ubers or working entry-level tech jobs just to survive.
It was so broken. So by dropping that rule, PEO has essentially acknowledged a fundamental truth, right? The laws of physics do not change at the border.
Exactly. Thermodynamics in Tehran work exactly the same as thermodynamics in Toronto. Gravity in Manila is the same as gravity in Mississauga.
That is the philosophical core of this update. Ontario is actively competing for international talent in a globalized workforce. By saying your international experience fully counts toward that new 2-year requirement, they are removing the friction from global talent integration.
And there is a logistical update that compounds all of this speed, too. The elimination of sequential bottlenecks.
Oh, right. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so in the past, the regulatory process was strictly linear. You had to submit your work experience, then you had to wait months, sometimes over a year, just for a committee to review it.
Just sitting in a pile in a desk somewhere.
Exactly. And only after they approved it would they allow you to register for your technical exams. You were completely at the mercy of their internal administrative pacing.
But under the July 2026 framework,
It is entirely concurrent. You can tackle your technical exams, your ethics and law exam, and the documentation of your work experience all at the exact same time. You do not have to wait for Step A to finish before you initiate Step B.
So if we look at the timeline impact of all these changes combined, slashing experience to 2 years, accepting international experience, and allowing concurrent processing, what does this do to an applicant's actual timeline?
The source material is very clear on this, and it's amazing. What used to be a multi-year, often agonizing waiting game can now legitimately be completed in 9 to 16 months. They are seeing highly motivated applicants secure their P.Eng in under a year.
That is life-changing. Listener, I really want to ask you, if you could take the waiting period for your ultimate career goal, like the one thing standing between you and a massive salary jump, and suddenly cut it in half, how would that change your 5-year plan today?
It forces you to accelerate your ambitions, for sure. But as with any regulatory system, this newfound speed comes with a very specific, very demanding catch.
Right. They aren't just taking your word for it. If the work experience timeline is shorter and you don't need local Canadian supervision to prove you know what you're doing, PEO has to rely heavily on proving your academic foundation.
Which brings us to the first major hurdle, the confirmatory exams. Though most people just call them the technical exams.
And we need to clarify exactly who has to take these because it divides the applicant pool right down the middle based on a concept called CEAB accreditation.
Right.
So CEAB stands for the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board.
Correct. So if your 4-year undergraduate degree is from a CEAB accredited program, which encompasses most universities in Canada, the United States, the UK, and countries under agreements like the Washington Accord, you generally do not have to take these technical exams.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, your university's curriculum has already been vetted and pre-validated by the board.
So if you went to the University of Waterloo or MIT, you basically get a pass on this specific step.
Exactly. But if you studied outside of those accredited regions, which applies to a massive portion of international applicants coming from the Middle East, Asia, South America, and parts of Europe, PEO requires definitive proof of your academic equivalency.
Because they haven't audited your specific university.
Right. So they assign you technical exams to confirm that your foundational knowledge actually meets the Canadian standard.
Okay, but this introduces what I think is one of the most frustrating bureaucratic realities in the entire process. The source material highlights this, and we can call it the degree trap.
Oh, the degree trap is brutal.
It really is. So imagine this scenario. An applicant gets their bachelor's degree in engineering from an unaccredited university in their home country. Then they move to Canada and they get a master's degree in engineering from the University of Toronto. Or maybe they go to the U.S. and get a PhD from Stanford. Like they have straight A's in the most advanced, elite North American institutions. They apply for their P.Eng, assuming their PhD just waves away any academic doubts.
Yeah.
What does PEO say to them?
PEO says you still have to take the undergraduate technical exams.
That is maddening. I can imagine people literally screaming into the phone at the PEO advisory boards. I am doing postdoctoral research on quantum materials in Toronto, and you want me to take a basic undergrad exam?
It feels deeply counterintuitive, I know, and it is a harsh reality for so many highly educated immigrants. But if you look at the regulatory body's mandate, it actually has a cold, strict logic to it.
Go on.
The P.Eng license is fundamentally based on evaluating your 4-year bachelor's degree equivalency. It is about a broad foundational baseline.
Explain that logic a bit more, though. Why doesn't the PhD prove the baseline? Like, shouldn't it?
Think about what a master's or a PhD actually is. It is hyper-specialized. If you get a PhD in a very specific niche of nanotechnology, you are undoubtedly a world expert in that tiny sliver of science.
Sure.
But the P.Eng license grants you the broad authority to practice general engineering. PEO needs to know that you understand general thermodynamics, broad structural mechanics, basic fluid dynamics, basically all the foundational classes you took in your first and second year of undergrad.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, a PhD in nanotechnology just does not legally prove to PEO that you remember how to calculate the load-bearing stress on a standard steel beam.
So because the advanced degree is a deep dive into a really narrow topic, it can't act as an umbrella to cover the broad undergraduate curriculum.
Exactly. The mandate is uniform public safety. They cannot assume you know the basics just because you mastered a complex specialty. Therefore, advanced degrees do not exempt you from confirmatory exams, period.
Wow. That's a tough pill to swallow. But let's say you accept your fate. You realize you cannot argue with the bureaucracy, and you agree to take the exams. Usually applicants are assigned somewhere between 2 to 4 of these exams, right?
Typically, yeah.
Let's really dig into the format and the environment of these tests, because the psychology of this is just fascinating and honestly deeply intimidating.
The format is a massive shock to the system for a modern professional. We are talking about a 3-hour-long, entirely written exam. And when we say written, we mean long answer format, hand-calculated math and physics.
Wait, no multiple choice?
0. There are no multiple choice safety nets here.
Just think about the irony of this. You have a civil engineer in their early 40s. They've been working in the industry for 15 years. Every single day, they use advanced proprietary software like AutoCAD or finite element analysis programs, software that can simulate fluid dynamics or stress test a virtual bridge in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, literally seconds.
And suddenly, for this exam, they are shoved back into the 1990s. They're handed a blank piece of paper and a pen and told to manually calculate load distributions using a scientific calculator for 3 hours straight.
the physical and mental stamina required is just immense.
Yeah.
These are mid-career professionals who haven't sat in a quiet examination hall taking a high-stakes, handwritten university-level test in decades. Your hand literally forgets how to write equations for 3 hours continuously. You cramp up.
I bet. And it's not just the format. The actual mechanics of how you are graded on the test paper are incredibly specific. The source points out this really crucial quirk. When you open the exam, you were typically presented with 7 or 8 complex questions, but you do not answer all of them.
Right. You are explicitly instructed to only answer 5 questions.
Which gives you a moment of strategy, right? You get to scan the 8 questions, identify the topics you are strongest in, and select your 5 best options.
Yes, but this is where the strict adherence to instructions becomes a complete trap for overachievers.
How so?
Let's say you answer your 5 questions, and you still have 30 minutes left on the clock. You look at question number 6, and you think, you know what? I know the answer to this one too. I'll just write it down as a backup in case I messed up question number 2. Maybe they will grade my best 5.
That sounds like a perfectly logical strategy to me.
It is a fatal error. The grading matrix is absolute. If you answer 6 questions, the examiner will grade the first 5 that physically appear on your paper, and they will physically cross out and completely ignore the 6th one.
Wait, really? So even if your 6th answer was a stroke of absolute engineering genius and your 2nd answer was completely botched, they will not swap them?
Nope. You get the bad grade for question 2 and literally 0 credit for question 6.
That is wild. You are penalized for not following the directive. You must be decisive. Pick your 5, execute them perfectly, and stop writing.
Exactly. Stop writing.
Let's talk about the logistics of actually taking this exam. Because while the format is pen and paper, the administration of it is highly modern, which creates a very strange juxtaposition.
Yeah, since PEO allows applicants from all over the world, these exams are administered remotely through a highly proctored digital setup. You are sitting at a desk at home with your blank paper, but you are under intense surveillance.
The source outlines this dual camera setup. Walk us through what the applicant actually experiences in that room.
Okay, so you have to establish total academic integrity. First, you have a primary camera, usually your laptop webcam, facing you directly. It's monitoring your eye movements, your face, making sure you're looking at the screen or your paper.
Okay, pretty standard for online tests.
But that isn't enough. You are also required to set up a secondary camera, which is usually your smartphone, and it has to be positioned behind you and to the side.
So the proctor, who is watching you live, can see your screen, your hands, your paper, and your immediate surroundings all at once.
Exactly. It's a full 360-degree view almost. If you look off screen for too long, or if someone accidentally walks into the room, your exam can be completely invalidated right there.
Oh, man.
Yeah, you sit in this high-pressure panopticon for 3 hours, scribbling out complex math, and then when the clock runs out, you have a very narrow window to use your phone to photograph your handwritten pages and upload them to the secure portal.
The anxiety of just making sure the upload works before the timer expires sounds almost as stressful as the physics questions themselves.
Oh, people definitely panic during the upload.
What about reference materials? Are you allowed to bring textbooks into this environment?
It is entirely dependent on the specific subject you are testing for. Some exams are brutally closed book. You bring your brain, a pen, and an approved calculator. That's it. But others are open book, allowing textbooks, and some have a middle ground where you are allowed to bring in a specific cheat sheet, usually a single double-sided piece of paper where you can cram as many formulas and microscopic notes as humanly possible.
I remember those from college.
Yeah, you have to meticulously check the syllabus for your specific exam to know the exact parameters.
Let's talk about the financial side of this crucible, because none of this is free.
Oh no, the fees are substantial. Your first technical exam attempt will cost you $700 SCAD.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you are assigned multiple exams, each subsequent exam is $200.
So if PEO assigns you the standard 4 technical exams, you are looking at $1,300 just for the privilege of taking the tests. And that doesn't even include textbooks, prep courses, or the time off work you need to study.
Which is why failing is so punishing, both mentally and financially. And regarding preparation, the source material highlights a very dangerous assumption that many applicants make when they start studying.
This is the part about past papers, right? Because my instinct, and I think any student's instinct, would be to scour the internet for old exams, memorize the patterns, and just regurgitate them.
And you can find them. You can go online specifically to sites like the EGBC, which is the Engineering Board for British Columbia, and find publicly available past exam questions from 2009 and earlier.
So why is that dangerous, if they are official past exams?
Because the source explicitly warns that relying on those pre-2009 exams is a recipe for catastrophic failure. The testing methodology has completely evolved since then. The exams administered today are entirely different from the ones 15 years ago. In fact, many of the newer questions are dynamically generated by AI.
Wait, AI-generated physics exams?
Yes.
Seriously?
The system understands the core syllabus and the required competencies, and it dynamically generates new scenarios, new variables, and totally new applications for every single semester.
That is insane.
You cannot memorize past papers because the exact questions you will face have literally never existed before.
That is wild. It forces you to actually understand the underlying principles. You can't just memorize that a steel beam of X length with Y weight will bend Z amount. You have to know why it bends, so that when the AI throws a completely novel material and a weird geometric shape at you, you can adapt the foundational formula to solve it.
Exactly. The source notes that high-quality preparation courses actually have to adjust their curriculum constantly based on what students report seeing in the immediately preceding semester. The evolution of the test is that rapid. You must study the concepts, not the history.
So just to summarize this hurdle for the listener, you are paying hundreds of dollars to sit in a room under the surveillance of 2 cameras, writing out complex AI-generated calculus and physics by hand for 3 hours, knowing that if you answer 6 questions instead of 5, you might fail, and if you do fail, you have to pay and do it all over again.
It is the definition of a high-stakes academic crucible.
It really is. I want to turn to the listener again. When was the last time you had to take a 3-hour handwritten test? Just imagine doing it tomorrow morning. How nervous would you be? I know my handwriting has basically devolved into a secret code that even I can't read.
Right. Most people type everything now.
The physical act of writing for 3 hours is daunting enough.
It is a massive adjustment. But what if there was a strategic way to bypass a huge chunk of this nightmare?
And this is where the deep dive gets incredibly exciting. We move into the strategy of the July 2026 updates, specifically something called the Good Performance Policy. If the technical exams are the gauntlet, this policy is the golden ticket.
This is arguably the most critical strategic element for an international applicant to understand. So as we established, applicants with unaccredited degrees are typically assigned between 2 to 4 technical exams. To understand the hack, we first need to understand how these exams are categorized.
Right, the syllabus isn't just one big list. They group them.
Exactly. The exams are divided into 3 main buckets. Group A consists of your core fundamental technical subjects for your discipline.
Okay, core subjects.
Group B contains advanced or highly specialized technical subjects. And Group C is complementary studies, which covers softer sciences like engineering economics, management, or health and safety.
So a typical assignment from PEO might be 4 exams, 2 core subjects from Group A, 1 advanced subject from Group B, and 1 complementary subject from Group C. That is 4 separate 3-hour exams hanging over your head.
Historically, you just had to grind through all 4. It took a year or more. But PEO has recently reintroduced the Good Performance Policy, which essentially offers you a high-stakes deal.
Let's unpack the rules of this deal, because it is literally a game changer, but the conditions are incredibly strict. The premise is, if you perform exceptionally well on your first 2 exams, they will completely waive the remaining 2. You take 2, and you are entirely done with the technical requirement.
Yep.
So what is condition number 1?
Condition 1. You must take 2 technical exams in a single sitting. Now, in the bureaucratic language of PEO, a single sitting does not mean the same day.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that would be impossible. It means the same academic semester or testing window. For example, the fall-winter semester. You might take 1 exam in late October and the second exam in late November. That qualifies as a single sitting because they were registered for and executed within the same cycle.
Okay, that makes sense. Condition 1, 2 exams, 1 semester window. Condition 2.
Condition 2 dictates the type of exams you take. They must be from the same engineering discipline. Furthermore, they must be heavily technical. You have to take either 2 exams from Group A or 1 exam from Group A and 1 from Group B.
Let me stop you there. Can I take 1 hard physics exam from Group A and then take engineering economics from Group C to make my life easier?
No. That is a common misconception, and it will immediately disqualify you from the waiver. Complementary studies from Group C do not count toward triggering the Good Performance Policy. It must be core technical subjects. They want to test your hard science fundamentals.
Got it. Group A and B only. Now, condition 3, which is the massive cliff edge.
The grade requirement. You must score 65% or higher on both of those exams.
Wait, I thought a passing grade in university is usually 50%.
50% is the standard passing grade for these PEO exams as well. If you get a 50%, you pass the exam. But a simple pass does not trigger the good performance policy. To get the remaining exams waived, you must prove a higher level of baseline competency. You need that 65%.
Okay, let's explore the risk-reward matrix of this because it is intense. Let's imagine a scenario. I register for 2 exams in the fall semester. I study endlessly for the first one, a Group A physics exam, and I absolutely crush it. Score an 89%.
Awesome.
But I get a bit burned out, and on the second exam in November, I struggle. I still pass, but I get a 60%. What happens?
Okay, so you have successfully passed both exams individually. You will never have to take those 2 specific exams again. However, the good performance policy fails.
Because I didn't hit 65% on the second one, even though my average between the 89% and the 60% is well over 65%.
Averages do not matter at all. It is a hard binary cutoff for each individual exam. Because you scored a 60% on the second test, the waiver is not applied. You will then receive a notification from PEO that you are required to register for, pay for, and pass the remaining 2 exams that were originally assigned to you.
That is brutal. You are celebrating passing 2 incredibly hard exams, but simultaneously realizing you now have to spend another $400 and another 6 months studying for 2 more.
It is a massive high-stakes gamble, and there is an administrative catch regarding timing, too. This policy is not retroactive to exams taken before the framework change. If you took an exam in May of 2026 and got a 70%, you cannot combine it with an exam taken in October 2026 to get the waiver. It only applies to fresh sittings under the new July rules.
If we look at the broader picture, why does PEO even offer this? Why let people skip exams?
It's an incentive system designed for efficiency. PEO is dealing with a massive backlog of applicants. If an applicant can definitively prove by scoring 65% or higher across 2 dense core technical subjects simultaneously that their engineering fundamentals are rock solid, PEO determines that forcing them to take 2 more exams is statistically redundant.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, the applicant has successfully proven their academic equivalency. It saves the applicant time, and it saves PEO administrative resources.
Okay, here is where this policy goes from being a neat trick to a profound strategic loophole. And it involves switching disciplines.
Oh, yeah. This is a nuance that surprises almost every applicant when they first read the rules.
The source material gives a fantastic example of this. Let's imagine an applicant who has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from a university in South America. But for the last 10 years, their actual career has been entirely on construction sites, dealing with civil engineering concepts, concrete pouring, soil stability, structural loads. They haven't looked at a mechanical engineering textbook in a decade. When PEO assigns them their exams, and they look at the mechanical lists, things like advanced thermodynamics and fluid mechanics, they realize they're completely out of their depth.
Right. They are effectively a civil engineer in daily practice, even though their paper degree says mechanical.
So what can they do? PEO actually allows that person to completely switch tracks for their exams, right? That mechanical engineer can legally elect to take civil engineering exams instead.
Yes, absolutely. As long as you take 2 exams from the same discipline to trigger the good performance policy, it does not matter if that discipline matches your original university degree.
That is incredibly pragmatic. They aren't punishing you for how your career evolved. They just want you to prove competency in a foundational discipline.
Exactly. It allows professionals to test in the areas where they actually possess current active expertise.
So if we are playing this game strategically, and our entire goal is to hit that 65% mark on 2 exams to get the waiver, how do we choose which exams to take? The source material actually breaks down specific strategic pairings for different disciplines. They've analyzed which subjects historically have higher pass rates and more manageable curriculums.
The strategy here is critical. Your goal is not to pick the hardest, most abstract subjects to prove to the board how much of a genius you are. Your goal is to reliably pass with a 65%.
Right, leave your ego at the door. What are the recommendations?
Let's start with civil engineering. The source strongly recommends pairing elementary structural analysis with hydraulics and water supply.
Why those 2 specifically?
Because the math is tangible and predictable. Furthermore, the source explicitly warns against taking advanced structural analysis. The syllabus for the advanced course includes highly complex, nonlinear structural behaviors that are notoriously difficult to master under a 3-hour time constraint. Stick to the elementary version. It satisfies the Group A requirement just the same.
What about electrical engineering?
For electrical, the recommended pairing to hit the 65% waiver is circuits, alongside digital systems and computers. These are foundational logic and math-based courses that, if you understand the core rules, you can reliably calculate the answers to.
Okay. And for mechanical engineering?
The suggested path is taking thermodynamics and heat transfer, along with either engineering materials or advanced strength of materials.
And what's fascinating from the Q&A section of the source material is how flexible these categories are for niche engineers. There was a chemical engineer who asked a question during the seminar. They said, hey, there isn't a massive dedicated list of chemical engineering courses offered every single semester. What do I do?
And the expert's answer was brilliant. They told the chemical engineer to take those exact mechanical engineering courses, thermodynamics and materials.
Because the core concepts of heat transfer and material properties cross over heavily into chemical engineering.
If that chemical engineer passes those 2 mechanical exams with a 65%, they get the waiver and they move on with their P.Eng process. Yep. Even someone with a background in technical sales asked a question. They were worried that because their current role wasn't hardcore design, they would be locked out of the exam process entirely.
And the answer?
The answer is no. Your current job title doesn't lock you out of the technical exams. You just have to pick a discipline, register, and pass the tests.
But you have to be careful with the logistics. The source emphasizes that registration windows are incredibly tight and unforgiving.
Oh, very unforgiving. For the fall-winter sitting mentioned in the transcript, the registration closed on July 17th. If you miss that window by 1 day, you cannot plead your case. You cannot ask for an extension. You are strictly locked out for 6 months until the next cycle begins, which completely derails your timeline.
Wow. And what if you register, you pay the $900 for your 2 exams, and a month later you realize you are completely overwhelmed and not ready? Can you delay?
The source material is crystal clear on this. There are absolutely no refunds, and you cannot postpone to the next semester just to save your good performance policy chance. If you register and you don't show up, it is recorded as a failed attempt.
Seriously?
Yes, you have to be absolutely certain you can commit the hundreds of hours required to study before you hit that submit button.
The pressure is immense. Which leads me to ask you, the listener, if you were in this position, would you take this high-pressure, double-or-nothing gamble? Would you risk taking 2 brutally hard exams simultaneously to try and save yourself months of future studying? Or would you play it safe, pace yourself, and accept that you are going to take all 4 exams over the next 2 years?
It is a profound test of your own self-assessment and confidence.
It really is.
Yeah.
But let's say you do it.
Yeah.
You take the gamble, you study relentlessly, you conquer the technical exams, you get your 65%, you trigger the good performance policy, and the waiver drops. You celebrate. You are finally done with engineering physics. But your relief is short-lived, because now you have to switch gears entirely. You have to move from the laws of physics to the laws of the land.
Which brings us to the next mandatory phase, the National Professional Practice Exam, commonly referred to as the NPPE.
Now, I want to be clear about who takes this exam. We just spent a lot of time talking about CEA accreditation and how MIT or University of Toronto grads get to skip the technical exams. Do they get to skip the NPPE?
Absolutely not. The technical exams are only for unaccredited degrees. But the NPPE, it is universally mandatory. It does not matter if you got your degree from Oxford, Stanford, Waterloo, or a small technical college in a developing nation. Every single applicant, without exception, must pass the NPPE to get a P.Eng in Canada.
Okay, so we all end up in the same room eventually.
Yeah.
What is the format of the NPPE? Because we just escaped a 3-hour, long-form, handwritten nightmare. Please tell me this is different.
It is entirely different. The NPPE is a 2.5-hour exam, and it consists of 110 multiple-choice questions. It is a strictly closed-book exam.
Let me do the math on that really quick. 110 multiple-choice questions in 150 minutes. That means you have exactly 1 minute and 21 seconds per question.
Yes. And the subject matter is not technical. It covers 7 distinct categories, focusing heavily on professionalism, engineering ethics, and Canadian engineering law.
So, 81 seconds per question on law and ethics. Why is this exam notoriously so tricky?
What's fascinating here is that the difficulty does not lie in complex calculations. You aren't figuring out load-bearing limits. It is fundamentally a test of reading comprehension, ethical reasoning, and time management under extreme psychological pressure.
I was trying to think of an analogy for the NPP, and the best way I can describe it is this. Imagine taking a rapid-fire driving test, but instead of parallel parking, Every single question is a complex moral trolley problem combined with corporate contract law, and you have 80 seconds to solve it.
That is a highly accurate description of the experience. The questions are not simple definitions. They present dense, paragraph-long legal or ethical scenarios.
Give me an example of what that looks like.
Okay, so a question might describe a scenario where you, the engineer, discover a microfracture in a support beam of a building under construction. The fracture is currently within the legal tolerance limits, but your engineering judgment tells you it could worsen over 10 years. However, your boss tells you to ignore it because fixing it will bankrupt the client, and the client has threatened a massive lawsuit if the project is delayed.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
Right. In 80 seconds, you have to read that scenario, process the nuances, recall the specific Canadian legal precedents regarding duty to report, balance that against confidentiality clauses in contract law, and then choose the most appropriate action from 4 options.
And let me guess, the multiple choice options aren't obviously wrong.
Exactly. The distractors, the incorrect multiple choice options, are intentionally designed to sound almost right or ethically defensible in a casual setting, but they are not the strictly legally required professional standard. You are forced to distinguish between what might be a good idea in a corporate boardroom and what is your strict legal obligation to public safety.
And if you get bogged down debating the morality of one question for 3 or 4 minutes, you have completely destroyed your pacing for the rest of the 110-question exam. You will run out of time.
Time management is the primary reason people fail the NPP. You have to maintain a relentless, decisive pace.
Is there any good news about the NPP?
The silver lining is its availability. While the technical exams are only offered twice a year in very rigid windows, the NPP is offered 5 times a year.
Oh, that is a huge logistical relief.
It allows for much more flexibility in your overall timeline. You can slot the NPP in whenever you feel ready, regardless of where you are in the rest of the application process. The strategic recommendation from the source is to knock out your technical exams first, simply because their schedule is so inflexible, and then pivot your brain to study for the NPP.
It's just wild to think about. You're sitting in a room, the clock is relentlessly ticking, and you have to decide if a theoretical engineer should blow the whistle on a corrupt client or respect a binding non-disclosure agreement, and you have exactly 1 minute to make the call.
It is the ultimate measure of how well you have internalized the professional and legal standards of the country. PEO needs to know that when push comes to shove, you will protect the public, not the profit margin.
Which makes me wonder, and I want to pose this to the listener, do you think a rapid-fire multiple-choice test is actually an effective way to measure someone's professional ethics and legal judgment? Or is morality too complex to be boiled down to an A, B, C, or D answer under a ticking clock?
It is a profound debate that happens in every regulated field. Honestly, medicine, law, engineering, how do you objectively quantify subjective ethics?
It's an imperfect system, but it's the gate you have to pass through. Now, assuming you survive this legal and ethical gauntlet, you move to the final and perhaps most reflective major hurdle, the Competency-Based Assessment, or the CBA. This is all about validating your past.
This is where the theoretical knowledge you proved in the exams meets the practical reality of your career. We talked at the very beginning about how Ontario reduced the work experience requirement from 4 years down to 2 years. The CBA is the specific mechanism that allows them to do that safely.
Right.
This document is where that 2-year experience rule is truly put to the test.
Looking at this competency-based assessment, it feels less like a traditional resume and much more like you are building a legal defense file for your own career.
Yep.
You can't just write a bullet point saying, I'm a good engineer. You have to provide evidentiary exhibit.
That is the exact framework they are using. Calling the CBA a resume is a massive understatement. It is an extensive, hyper-detailed documentation of your specific actions in the workplace. You are required to write detailed narratives answering 34 or 35 specific competency indicators.
34 different indicators. How do they organize those?
They are spread across 7 distinct categories. They cover everything you would expect, like technical design, application of engineering theory, and project management. But they also heavily weight soft skills, your communication abilities, your conflict resolution, and crucially, your direct impact on society and the environment.
So if I'm writing this, I can't just say, I designed a bridge in 2024. No.
That would be rejected immediately. You have to say, I utilized finite element analysis to design the load-bearing supports for Project X, specifically to mitigate the environmental risk of soil erosion in a flood zone, while actively coordinating the safety protocols with a multidisciplinary team of architects and city planners.
Wow.
Yeah, you have to provide concrete, real-world examples from your career that prove you meet each specific indicator.
This raises a really interesting psychological challenge for the applicant.
Yeah.
How do you translate your daily, messy, real-world job, which often involves a lot of unglamorous emails, budget meetings, and just putting out fires, into this highly rigid academic framework?
Writing a CBA is a distinct skill entirely separate from being a good engineer. You have to learn to speak the specific bureaucratic language of the regulatory body. You have to extract the underlying engineering principles from your daily routine and articulate them clearly.
And here is the kicker. You can't just write a beautifully articulated piece of fiction and submit it. Someone has to officially vouch for every word you write.
Yes. Every single competency you claim must be signed off by a validator.
And the rules around who can be a validator used to be the biggest roadblock of all.
Historically, and in many Canadian provinces today still, the rule states that your validator must be a licensed Canadian P.Eng who directly supervised your work.
Which brings us crashing right back into that catch-22 we discussed earlier. If you are a highly skilled immigrant who just arrived in Ontario, how on earth do you find a Canadian P.Eng to validate your past experience if you haven't been able to get a job in Canada yet?
This is where PEO's recent updates are so powerful, and it's what we can call the international loophole. PEO officially states that if your experience was gained outside of Canada, your validator does not need to be a Canadian P.Eng.
That is a monumental shift in policy.
It is entirely paradigm shifting. The validator simply needs to be a senior licensed engineer in the country where the work actually occurred, and they must have been your direct supervisor.
Amazing.
The source transcript specifically highlights a Q&A where an applicant asked about the specifics of this. PEO essentially admitted that they are not experts on the specific licensing boards of every single country on Earth. What PEO cares about is authority and accountability. They want to know that this person was a recognized senior engineer managing the project you worked on, and that they can legally attest to the accuracy of your competency claims.
Let's trace a real-world example of this. Let's say we have an engineer who worked in Manila for the last 3 years before moving to Toronto. Under this new rule, they write up their CBA based on their projects in the Philippines. They then contact their old boss back in Manila, who is a licensed civil engineer under the Philippine Regulatory Board. And that old boss can validate the Ontario CBA.
Exactly. The applicant submits the CBA to PEO. PEO then securely sends a copy directly to the validator in Manila. The validator reviews your claims and basically rates your performance on those 34 specific indicators, usually on a numerical scale, and signs off on it.
And I imagine you cannot validate yourself, right? Because in the Q&A, someone actually asked this. They said, hey, I was a licensed grade 1 senior engineer in my home country, and I own my own consulting firm. Can I just validate my own work?
And the answer is a resounding no. Even if you were the CEO and the lead engineer of your own firm, you cannot validate yourself. You always need a third-party supervisor or, in the case of a business owner, a senior engineering client who can technically vouch for the work you deliver to them. There must be an external chain of accountability.
What about the reality of career trajectories?
Right.
Because very few careers are a perfectly straight line. What if someone was a hardcore design engineer for a few years, then took a career detour, and now wants to get their P.Eng?
The source material addresses this brilliantly through a specific question posed by a seminar participant. This person explained that they had 5 years of pure, hardcore engineering design experience right out of university. But then they transitioned into proposals and technical sales for the last 5 years, a role that involved engineering knowledge but wasn't strictly engineering design.
Right.
They wanted to know if that 5-year gap in design disqualified them.
How does the CBA matrix handle that kind of gap?
The CBA is surprisingly flexible regarding non-engineering gaps, as long as you have a cumulative total of the required pure engineering experience to point back to. In Ontario's new case, that requirement is a total of 2 years.
Oh, I see. So the applicant can say, look at my first 3 years out of school. I was doing complex structural design. Then I spent 5 years doing sales. Now I want my license. As long as they can pull their 34 competency examples from those early pure engineering years, the recent sales gap doesn't penalize them.
Exactly. The evaluator essentially ignores the non-engineering experience for the technical requirements. They only care if you can definitively prove the minimum required months of actual engineering practice.
But can they use the sales experience for anything at all?
Yes, and this is where strategic framing comes in. You have to tie your non-engineering experience to soft skill competencies where possible. For instance, that person's 5 years in technical sales might not fulfill a technical design competency, but it absolutely fulfills the CBA indicators for communication, conflict resolution, project management, and financial understanding.
It is like a massive jigsaw puzzle of your own life. You are pulling a technical design example from 2021, a communication example from your sales job in 2024, and piecing it all together to create a complete picture of a competent professional.
It is the ultimate defense of your professional career. It requires deep introspection and strategic articulation.
Which leads me to this question for you, the listener. If you were forced to sit down today and write a highly detailed, evidence-based defense of your last 2 years of work, how easily could you prove the exact impact you had on your industry, your society, and the environment?
For most of us, looking at our daily emails and meetings, that would require some serious, uncomfortable reflection.
It really exposes the gap between what we do every day and the broader impact of our profession. But, okay, let's say you've done it. You gambled on the good performance policy and passed your technical exams with a 70%. You survived the 80-second per question NPPE ethics exam. You submitted a flawless 34-point CBA, and your old boss in Manila validated it perfectly. What is left?
This brings us to the final wrap-up phase. Edge cases, global mobility, and final logistics. This is where we look at the administrative realities of the system, synthesized from the extensive Q&A in the transcript.
Let's start with the absolute basics. Age and immigration status. Who is legally allowed to apply for a P.Eng in Ontario?
The official minimum age is 18. However, practically speaking, because you need a 4-year degree and 2 years of postgraduate experience, applicants are almost exclusively 22 or older.
And what about immigration status? Do you need to be a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen to hold this license?
This is one of the most surprising, progressive, and frankly welcoming elements of the PEO system. Immigration status is entirely irrelevant to the application process.
Irrelevant. You don't need a PR card.
Completely irrelevant. You can be in Canada on a temporary student visa, you can be on a closed work permit, or you could be living halfway across the world with no immediate plans to ever move to Canada. You can still apply for, take the exams for, and achieve your full P.Eng license.
Let's drill down into that geographic flexibility because it feels paradoxical.
It is a truly borderless application process. You can apply to the Ontario Regulatory Board using a home address in Vancouver, Calgary, Mumbai, Tehran, or Manila. They do not care where you physically reside while you are going through the assessment.
That is wild. You are applying for a localized provincial license, the specific legal authority to practice engineering and stamp blueprints in the province of Ontario, but the application process is globally accessible. The source actually explicitly encourages people living in other Canadian provinces, like British Columbia, to apply through Ontario. Why is that?
Because of regulatory arbitrage. The Ontario process, with its new 2-year requirement and concurrent processing without sequential bottlenecks, is currently so much faster and smoother than other provinces. The strategy is to get your P.Eng in Ontario first, even if you live in BC.
Right.
Once you have the P.Eng in one Canadian province, transferring it to another province is a much simply faster administrative step under interprovincial mobility agreements.
You find the path of least resistance within the national framework. It's brilliant. But logistically, if you are sitting in Mumbai or BC, how do you handle the physical paperwork? Because they need to prove your degree is real. You can't just mail them a photocopy of your diploma.
No, you cannot, and this is the only major physical document hurdle in the entire process. PEO requires your university transcripts to be authenticated and sent directly through an evaluation service called World Education Services, or WES.
Right. WES acts as the middleman. They verify that your specific degree from a foreign university is actually equivalent to a Canadian bachelor's degree in terms of credit hours, curriculum depth, and institutional legitimacy.
Exactly. The process is strict regarding the chain of custody. You must request your home university to send your sealed transcripts directly to WES. WES evaluates them, translates them if necessary, and then WES sends their official report directly to PEO. You, as the applicant, never touch the physical paper. This ensures the documents cannot be tampered with.
A great logistical question came up in the transcript Q&A regarding timing. Someone asked if you need that WES report fully finished and submitted to PEO before you can register for the technical exams before that strict July 17th deadline.
And the answer was a massive relief. No. You can create your PEO account online, which only takes about 30 minutes, and you can register and pay for the technical exams immediately, even while you are still waiting for your home university to mail documents to WES. They allow the administrative processes to run in parallel with the exam processes.
That concurrent structure again, it really does shave months off the timeline. But what if life just gets in the way? You create the account, you submit the WES request, you get assigned your exams, and then you have a child, or you get a massive promotion at work, and you just abandon the P.Eng process for 3 years. Does your application stay open forever?
File maintenance is a critical administrative detail. PEO has a strict heartbeat rule. You must take at least one exam per calendar year to keep your file active. If a full year passes without you attempting an exam, they will administratively close your file.
Is it gone forever? Do you lose your $900 fees and have to start completely from scratch?
Not necessarily from scratch. The source notes that while the file is closed, you can usually reopen it by initiating an email dialogue with PEO and paying a reinstatement fee. They don't permanently delete your existence from their servers. However, it is an administrative headache and a delay you want to avoid. The philosophy is momentum. PEO wants applicants who are actively pursuing the license, not just holding a placeholder in the system indefinitely.
When you lay it all out like this, it really is a marvel of modern administrative systems. We're talking about online proctoring with dual cameras, international validators signing off digitally, WES digital transcript verifications, and zero immigration barriers. Applying for a P.Eng in Ontario is paradoxically more accessible to someone sitting in a cafe in Mumbai today than it was to someone sitting in a library in downtown Toronto 10 years ago.
It is the ultimate digitization of professional regulation. The regulatory body has realized that the friction of physical distance and paper mail should not prevent the rapid verification of technical competence.
Which brings up a great question for you, listener. Does the idea of a borderless digital application process for high-level, critical safety professional licenses make you feel more optimistic about the future of global work, or does it make you nervous about how we regulate local infrastructure?
It certainly democratizes access to professional credentials, which changes the global economic landscape.
It really does. Okay, let's bring this all together. We have gone deep into the weeds of the July 2026 PEO updates, the exams, the ethics, and the experience matrices. Let's briefly recap the ultimate strategic path for an international engineer looking to get licensed in Ontario under this new framework.
Synthesizing everything we've analyzed today, the optimal path starts with immediate action on the technical exams. You do not wait. You determine if you fall into the degree trap, and if you do, you register for 2 core technical exams in the same sitting, strategically choosing a discipline you are strongest in.
Right. You take the high-stakes good performance policy gamble. You study relentlessly to hit that 65% mark on both exams to waive the rest of your technical requirements.
Exactly. While you are intensely studying for those physics and math exams, you initiate your WES transcript evaluation in the background so the paperwork is moving. Once the technical exams are successfully behind you, you immediately pivot your mindset from physics to law, and you tackle the NPPE, the 110-question multiple choice exam. Because it's offered 5 times a year, you can schedule it the moment you feel ready to navigate those ethical trolley problems.
And parallel to all of this, on your weekends, you are drafting your competency-based assessment. You are carefully translating your last 2 years of international or domestic engineering experience into those 34 specific indicators, and you are securing your former supervisor, wherever they are in the world, to validate it.
And if you execute this concurrently, aggressively utilizing the parallel processing without waiting for one step to finish before starting the next, a bureaucratic journey that used to take 3 to 4 years can realistically be finalized in 9 to 16 months.
It's an incredible window of opportunity. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to step back from the mechanics of the exams and the fees and look at the philosophy of what PEO has actually done here.
The shift away from requiring localized Canadian experience and the reduction of the chronological timeline from 4 years to 2 years, relying instead on strict merit-based competency exams and the CBA.
Yeah.
It is a massive structural paradigm shift for regulated professions.
It really is. It challenges a century of gatekeeping.
It forces us to ask a fundamental question about the modern workforce and the nature of knowledge. In an era of remote work, global digital infrastructure, and instantly shared engineering software, does local experience actually matter anymore for technical professions? Or is engineering knowledge, the mathematics, the physics, the safety protocols, truly a universal language that entirely transcends geography?
That is the big question. At the beginning of this deep dive, we talked about how pursuing a professional certification is often an overwhelming, murky labyrinth. For decades, the P.Eng process kept brilliant, highly qualified people locked out because they didn't have the right stamp from the right local firm, or they couldn't afford to wait 4 years to prove they knew how to build a bridge.
Exactly.
But what we are seeing with these July 2026 changes is a clearing of those muddy waters. The labyrinth is becoming a straight line again. It is a grueling, intense, highly scrutinized straight line that will test your endurance. But it is no longer based on where you are from. It is based entirely on what you actually know and your ability to prove it.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep pushing your own boundaries, and we'll see you next time.